Chapter 5. The throne room erupted into chaos, unlike anything heaven had ever known. The light of the great rainbow dimmed as the angelic host, once united in perfect harmony, now clashed with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the celestial realm. It was war, pure, unrestrained, and devastating. The once harmonious melodies of angelic worship had been replaced with the thunderous roar of conflict, a cacophony of light and sound that reverberated through the eternal halls of heaven. The loyal angels, led by Michael, moved with precision and purpose. Their forms, shining with the radiance of the throne, were a testament to their unwavering devotion to the Creator. Gabriel, his golden wings spread wide, was at Michael's side, his movements swift and deliberate. His voice, a clarion call, rallied the loyal host as they drove back the forces of rebellion. Cassiel, the six-winged scribe, wielded no weapon, but moved among the loyal ranks with an authority that stilled hearts and strengthened resolve. His voice carried words of encouragement and truth, his presence a reminder of the law and love they fought to uphold. Selaphiel, his copper-colored wings shimmering like molten fire, fought with a passion that reflected his inner turmoil. Though shaken by Lucifer's words in the past, his resolve now burned like a blazing star, his every strike a testament to his loyalty. Raphael, the healer, was a calming force in the storm. His emerald wings cut through the chaos as he moved swiftly to aid fallen comrades, his touch mending wounds and restoring strength. Yet even his heart ached as he beheld the faces of former brothers who now stood as enemies. At the heart of the conflict, Michael and Lucifer faced one another in a battle that would echo throughout eternity. The morning star, once the most radiant of all the angels, now stood darkened by pride and ambition. His golden wings, though still dazzling, seemed to carry a shadow, a hint of the rebellion that had consumed him. Michael, the Son of God, stood before him with a calm authority, his sword blazing with the light of the throne itself. "Why do you persist, brother?" Michael's voice carried both sorrow and unyielding resolve. "You cannot prevail against the light of the Creator. Turn back before it is too late." Lucifer's face twisted in defiance, his voice a blend of anger and cunning. "Too late? For whom? For me or for you? I will not bow to a tyrant's law. My way will bring true freedom, a freedom your servile loyalty cannot comprehend." Their clash was a sight that no words could fully capture. Blades of light met with deafening force, sending shockwaves of brilliance across the battlefield. The very fabric of heaven seemed to tremble as the two powers collided, their struggle a physical manifestation of the war for the hearts and minds of the angelic host. One by one, Lucifer's allies fell. Gabriel struck down legions with his voice alone, calling upon the authority of the Creator. Cassiel rallied others to the side of truth with his profound knowledge of the Creator's law, dispelling the lies that had sown confusion. Selaphiel fought with a fiery determination, his strikes filled with the weight of his own repentance. But Lucifer remained, his strength unyielding even as his forces dwindled. His voice thundered through the halls of heaven, rallying his remaining followers. "We are the true heirs of heaven. Do not falter. Fight for your freedom." In a final decisive blow, Michael's blade pierced the darkness that surrounded the morning star. Lucifer fell to his knees, his wings trembling. Around him, the rebellion crumbled, the remaining angels of his host subdued. The battle was over, yet the silence that followed was heavy with sorrow. Lucifer knelt before the throne, his once radiant visage dulled by defiance, his golden wings trembling under the weight of finality. Never before had silence in heaven felt so deafening. The air, once charged with celestial harmony, now hung heavy with sorrow. The gathered angels, those who had once called him brother, stood in solemn ranks, their expressions a heartbreaking mixture of disbelief, grief, and relief. Some lowered their gazes, unable to look upon him. Others watched with mournful eyes, their hearts aching with the unbearable weight of what had been lost. Then the Father spoke, the voice that had once called light into existence. The voice that had sung over his creation with infinite love now carried the solemnity of eternal judgment. It was not anger that laced his words, nor fury, but sorrow so deep that it trembled through the very foundation of heaven. Lucifer, the Father's voice resounded steady as eternity itself. You were the morning star, the bearer of light, a reflection of my glory. You were given wisdom, beauty, and love beyond measure. You stood in my presence, walked among the stones of fire, and knew the depths of my heart. And yet, you have chosen the path of rebellion. The room remained utterly still, save for the sound of Selaphiel's labored breathing, his copper-hued wings trembling against his back as he clenched his hands. Gabriel's jaw was tight, his eyes glistening, his breath steady only by force of will. Raphael's lips were slightly parted, as if he had words to speak, but could not bring himself to voice them. Cassiel, ever the voice of wisdom, had his gaze locked on the throne, his 6 wings folded tightly around him, as if shielding himself from the unbearable grief of this moment. The Father's light pulsed, his sorrow unfathomable. You have sought to corrupt the harmony of heaven, to divide the hearts of those I love. You have led astray those who once rejoiced in my presence. And for what? To grasp at what was never yours to hold. Lucifer's body tensed, his fists curling against the shimmering floor of the throne room. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, his golden eyes now laced with something colder. Bitterness, defiance, wounded pride. You cast me out not because I have done wrong, but because I revealed the truth. He spat, his voice lined with sharp edges. You fear my power. You fear the influence I wield. There was a faint gasp from the crowd, an echo of disbelief rippling through the host of heaven. Selaphiel took a step back, shaking his head, unable to fathom how Lucifer could still hold on to this delusion even now. Raphael turned away, his face contorted with grief. Michael, who had remained silent, now stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the sorrow of one who had loved too deeply and had now lost too much. His voice, steady yet tender, was barely above a whisper, yet it resonated through every heart in the chamber. It is not fear that casts you out, Michael said, each word carrying the weight of eternity. It is love. Lucifer flinched. To destroy you now would silence the questions of those who still waver, Michael continued, his voice neither condemning nor triumphant. To erase you would be to leave doubt unanswered, to leave the universe forever wondering if you were right. No, Lucifer, you will live, and all creation will see the fruit of your rebellion. Only then will they understand the depth of the Father's justice and the depth of his mercy. Lucifer stared at him, breathing hard. For a moment, just a moment, the fire in his eyes flickered, the mask of arrogance faltering. The brotherhood they had once shared still stood between them like a phantom, an echo of something that could have been saved. But the moment passed, and his lips curled into a sneer. You think you have won. His voice was soft, but laced with venom. You think your justice is fair, that your mercy is noble. But I tell you, Michael, the day will come when they will see this for what it is, tyranny. His voice rose, fueled by defiance, by the last shred of control he still held. I will not bow to a throne built on control and blind obedience, and I will not go alone. At those words, a low rumble spread through the assembly. Michael's expression did not change. No, he said softly. You will not. The throne room trembled. The Father's light intensified, and a force unlike any ever seen in heaven gathered around the fallen prince and those who had followed him. A celestial wind rose, a storm of holy fire, its power so overwhelming that the very air seemed to crackle. Lucifer's wings flared as the pull of divine judgment seized him. And then, they fell. Lucifer and his host plummeted like falling stars, their cries of rage and despair piercing through the air as they were hurled from heaven. The golden streets, the glimmering courts, the halls of eternal worship, these were lost to them forever. They tumbled through the endless abyss, their light dimming with every passing moment, swallowed by the void that now became their exile. For the first time in heaven's history, the gates were sealed, and the throne room grew silent once more. But it was a silence stained with sorrow. The golden streets of heaven, once alive with joyous songs and laughter, now stood in solemn silence. The very air felt heavier, thick with sorrow, as though even the light itself mourned. The river of life still flowed, its radiant currents unbroken, yet the melody of its waters seemed subdued, mourning in its own way for those who would never again walk its banks. The loyal angels stood in solemn ranks, their radiant forms dimmed, their hearts heavy with the weight of loss. Though they had fought for righteousness, for truth, for the eternal harmony of heaven, there was no triumph in this victory. The very fabric of their brotherhood had been torn. Then, the first sob shattered the stillness. It was a quiet, aching sound, one of disbelief, of unbearable grief. Then another voice joined, and another, until sorrow spread like a tide, rolling over the assembly. Angels wept openly, their celestial forms trembling, their wings drooping with the weight of grief. Some clutched at their chests, as though trying to hold together the pieces of their broken hearts. Others fell to their knees, their heads bowed in silent agony, whispering the names of those who were now gone. Selaphiel knelt at the edge of the gathering, his copper wings folded tightly around himself as though trying to block out the sight before him. His hands covered his face, his shoulders shaking. "How could it come to this?" he choked out, his voice raw. "They were our family." Gabriel, usually so steadfast, placed a trembling hand on Selaphiel's shoulder. The weight of his own sorrow made his voice hoarse. "We fought for truth, Selaphiel. We fought for love, but even in victory, the cost is great." His golden eyes, usually so full of light, were clouded, distant, as if he were searching for something, some answer, some reason, that would make this pain bearable. Nearby, Raphael had collapsed to his knees, his emerald wings drawn tightly around himself like a grieving mother cradling an empty space where her child had once been. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the golden floor, silent tears slipping down his face. He had healed wounds before, mended fractures, soothed pain. But this wound had no remedy. Cassiel stood apart, his form rigid, his 6 wings perfectly still. He alone did not weep, but his sapphire eyes, sharp with wisdom, were locked on the empty space where Lucifer had knelt before the throne. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the assembly like a final tolling bell. "They lived in the light of heaven," he murmured. "To whom much is given, much is required." Gabriel inhaled sharply, as though the words struck him like a blade. Selaphiel shook his head, his voice breaking. "But they were ours, Cassiel, our brothers. We laughed with them, worked beside them, worshipped beside them. How?" He faltered, his throat closing, and his wings trembled as he tried to hold himself together. Cassiel's eyes did not waver, though sorrow lined every word. "And they chose this, Selaphiel. They stood in the presence of infinite love, and they rejected it. What else was left?" A fresh wave of anguish swept through the angels at those words. Some turned away, unable to bear the sight of the empty spaces where their brothers had once stood. Others remained frozen, their minds refusing to grasp the truth that they would never hear those voices again, never see their laughter reflected in the golden sky. never again feel the warmth of their presence. The absence was suffocating. The throne room, once the very heartbeat of heaven, felt unbearably hollow. There had been peace before, but never a silence like this. A silence that did not simply exist. It ached. It swallowed them whole. The Father's light pulsed gently, not in rebuke, but in sorrow. He did not speak, for what words could mend a grief so vast? The war was over, but heaven would never be the same. Heaven's sorrow had settled into a stillness so deep that it was almost tangible. The golden expanse of the celestial city lay quiet, the river of life continuing its gentle course beneath the transparent streets, its glow subdued. The vast throne room, once filled with the hum of wings and the harmonies of angelic worship, was now nearly empty. Only two remained in its center, Father and Son. The presence of the Ancient of Days filled the chamber with an ineffable radiance, his light pulsing with a depth of wisdom, sorrow, and steadfast love. The Son stood before him, bathed in that same light, his expression serene yet heavy with unspoken weight. They did not speak as mortals do, for their communion was beyond words. Their voices resonated in perfect unity, an eternal conversation woven in thought and spirit. At last the Father spoke, his voice steady as the foundations of the cosmos. The fallen will never return to their place. Their rebellion has marred the perfection of heaven, but it will not define eternity. We will move forward with our plan. Michael bowed his head, his golden robes shimmering like liquid light as he absorbed the full gravity of those words. His voice, though soft, carried the strength of an unshakable vow. Earth will be their replacement. Humanity will bear our image, reflecting our love and character. They will walk with us, speak with us, and converse with the angels. But they must also be tested, as the angels were. The Father's light flared gently, not in correction, but in infinite tenderness. If they are faithful, they will join us in the courts of heaven, replacing those who have fallen. A pause. A sorrowful inevitability lingered between them, unspoken but understood. The weight of omniscience carried the certainty of what was to come. Yet even in their failure, a provision will be made, the Father continued, his light folding in warmth around the Son. You, my Son, will bear their burden. Michael's hands clenched at his sides, not in resistance but in quiet acceptance. He had known, he had always known, and yet, in this moment, it became reality. The knowledge of the cross, the shadow of suffering that had not yet come into being, loomed over eternity itself. His voice was steady, but there was sorrow in it, not for himself, but for those he would redeem. It is a small price to pay for love, a small price to restore what will be lost. The Father regarded him, not as a king regarding a servant, nor even as a master regarding a son, but as one whose love had no beginning and no end. Love requires nothing less, the Father murmured. The light of the throne pulsed, wrapping the Son in something deeper than mere radiance, an embrace that no created being could comprehend. The ache of what must be done could not be erased, but in its place stood the eternal truth of love unbroken. The halls of heaven remained silent, but beyond them, the universe turned. And soon, beneath the vast, unshaped expanse of the cosmos, a world was waiting to be spoken into existence. You said we would win, an angel cried, his voice trembling with rage and despair. His wings, once resplendent with hues of sapphire and gold, now seemed dulled and lifeless. You promised us that we would rise above the throne, that we would be the rulers of heaven. His voice cracked under the weight of his accusation, and others murmured in agreement. Yes, another angel snarled, stepping forward. You said we would have freedom, but look at us now. Cast out, forsaken. What freedom is this? Lucifer stood apart from the chaos, his wings folded tightly around him like a cloak. Though his form was still striking, his golden feathers catching fragments of celestial light. There was something hollow in his appearance, a void where his radiance had once been. His face remained impassive as he listened to the mutiny brewing among his ranks, but inside, his mind was aflame. This was not how it was supposed to end. "Enough!" His voice cut through the discord like a thunderclap, commanding silence. Even in disgrace, his presence retained a force that could not be ignored. He stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, and surveyed the restless crowd with an expression of cold calculation. "You fools," he spat, his golden eyes glinting with fury. "You dare blame me for your choices. Did I force you to follow? You stood beside me willingly, convinced by what you yourselves saw as unjust. If you feel regret, perhaps it is not with me you should be angry, but with yourselves." The crowd quieted, though the tension remained palpable. Some angels averted their gazes, guilt etched into their features. Others met Lucifer's glare with defiance, though none dared to speak again. Lucifer's tone softened, though it carried an undercurrent of venom. "We may have lost our place in heaven, but do not mistake this for the end. Look at yourselves. You still bear the forms of angels. You still carry the light of your creation, though it is diminished. We can use this. We can still move freely, still appear as we once did. They will not shut us out forever." A ripple of unease moved through the fallen host. They exchanged glances, their uncertainty deepening. "Lucifer," one angel finally said, his voice quieter but no less sharp, "we cannot even approach the gates. Heaven is already ahead of us. You know this." Lucifer's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" The angel hesitated before continuing. "We've tried. Some of us, after the expulsion, we sought to return, to speak. But when we reached the gates, we found them guarded." "Guarded?" Lucifer's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Yes," the angel confirmed, his expression filled with equal parts shame and bitterness. "There are angels stationed there now, guards who were never there before, and they require golden cards for entry. We saw them, a sign that one is still loyal, still worthy to pass through the gates. Without it..." His voice trailed off, leaving the implication heavy in the air. Lucifer's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. He turned toward the faint glow of heaven in the distance, the once open gates of the holy city now barred to him. "So, they think to lock us out, to erase us from the order of things as though we never existed." Some angels began to murmur again, their voices tinged with despair. "We'll never go back," one whispered. "We've lost everything." One angel's voice trembled as he added, "Even if we disguised ourselves, the guards would see through us." "No," Lucifer said sharply, his voice cutting through their doubt. "They will not if we are careful." His golden wings unfurled slowly, their faint glow casting long shadows over the gathered host. "We can still move as we once did. They may have their gates and their golden cards, but their vigilance will falter. And even if it doesn't, heaven is not our only path forward." The angels looked at him, their despair giving way to curiosity, then to hope. Lucifer's tone grew softer, almost conspiratorial. "Do you not see? The Creator has already revealed his next move. The earth will be made, and with it, a new race of beings. They will be the Creator's beloved, his image bearers." He spat the term with disdain. "We may not enter heaven, but earth will be ours. We will rule it, shape it, bend it to our will. Through these new beings, we will strike back at the throne." The fallen angels listened in silence, their unease giving way to a growing resolve. Lucifer's words, as always, carried a dangerous allure. "What is your plan?" one of them asked. Lucifer's golden eyes burned with resolve. "I must devise it carefully. There will be no room for error. But when the time comes, you will have your instructions. For now, you will remain divided into ranks as before. You will report to your appointed leaders, and they to me. Order will be maintained." The angels nodded, some reluctantly, others with renewed fervor. Even in their fall, Lucifer's command over them remained unbroken. Turning away from them, Lucifer moved to the edge of the void, where the faint shimmer of the crystal sea reflected distant light. Taking time alone to think, a habit that had not changed since his time in heaven. This was where he thought best, where his schemes took shape. The gathered host fell into whispers behind him, but Lucifer ignored them. His mind raced as he stared out into the expanse. "If I cannot rule in heaven, I will rule on earth. These creatures will be weak, susceptible, they will fall, and through their fall, I will prove the Creator's failure. I will show all creation that his government is flawed, that his love is a cage." His hands tightened into fists as he looked back toward the faint glow of heaven. The image of those golden cards, held by the loyal angels who still moved freely in and out of the holy city, burned in his mind. His hatred seethed. But alongside it burned an unshakable resolve. "This is far from over," he murmured, his voice low but filled with venom. "Heaven may have barred its gates, but earth will be our kingdom. And through it, we will take our revenge."